Have you ever wished you could, like, just instantly get how your brain works when you're trying to learn something totally new? You
Yeah.
know? Like, cut through all the complexity and go straight to the stuff that actually matters.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we are doing today
Yeah.
in this deep dive. We're zeroing in on a super important part of your brain.
Mm,
It's really deep in there, and it controls how you feel,
right.
how you remember stuff, and what keeps you going. The limbic system.
Exactly. To help us really get into this fascinating part of the brain,
Yeah.
we're using Shiva Narayan Taxshila's book, Limbic Working Mechanisms of the Brain.
Okay.
It's all about emotion, memory, and motivation. So basically, we're going to pull out all the key stuff from this book
Okay.
to give you a clearer idea of how your emotions and your drive to learn
Right.
are totally connected to how you make memories.
Okay, so our mission today is pretty straightforward. We
Mhm.
want to break down how this limbic system molds the way you learn and remember things.
That's
And by the end, we want to give you some aha moments, and some
Yeah.
practical stuff you can actually use. So
about right.
what exactly is the limbic system?
Well, at its core,
Yeah.
the limbic system is your brain's control center
Okay.
for your emotions,
Yeah.
how motivated you are, and how you create memories.
Right.
So it's not like one single thing in there,
Okay.
but it's more like a network of different parts of your brain
Uh-huh.
that all work together.
Okay.
And they act as this really important link.
Right.
On one side, it connects to the kind of like the more basic part of your brain, the brainstem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that handles like just keeping you alive, like breathing and your heartbeat.
Okay.
But on the other side,
Yeah.
it's linked up to the neocortex.
Okay.
Now, the neocortex is that outer layer of your brain.
Okay.
That's all about higher level thinking, like language
Yeah.
and figuring things out.
Okay, so it's like the emotional core, but it also talks to like the brain's CEO.
Yeah. That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And this core, this emotional core
Yeah.
is super important for so much of what makes us, well, us.
Right.
It has a big role in how we manage our emotions and
Yeah.
understand other people's emotions,
Okay.
how we act, the choices we make, even like our basic survival instincts,
Right.
Understanding how it all works gives us a lot of insight into the human experience.
Okay, so it's a widespread, important network.
Absolutely.
What are the pieces of this network?
Yeah.
What are the different parts and what do they actually do?
Think of it like a team,
Okay,
Each player has their own specific job.
gotcha.
So first up, we've got the amygdala,
Got the amygdala?
and it's often called the brain's emotion processor.
Okay.
Like it's heavily involved in handling all sorts of emotions, fear, pleasure,
Okay.
even aggression.
Gotcha.
But what's really cool for learning is its big role in emotional memory.
Okay, so like how I felt when I learned something?
Yeah, exactly. It helps make connections between those feelings, whether it's enthusiasm, determination, anything like that,
Okay.
and the actual info you're taking in.
Okay.
And that emotional link can really boost how well you remember stuff.
So if I'm like really curious about something,
Yeah.
or a little nervous even, my amygdala is kicking in and helping that information stick.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Then we've got the hippocampus.
Yeah, right.
You can think of that as the brain's memory center.
Okay.
Its main job is to turn short-term memories into those long-term ones.
Okay.
It's also super important for spatial awareness, remembering where things are
Yeah.
and connecting different ideas and concepts.
Okay.
Now, the really cool part is that the hippocampus works super closely with the prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part at the very front of your brain
Okay.
that does the really high-level thinking.
Okay.
And together, they integrate new info into, like, your existing understanding of the world.
Okay, so amygdala for the feels, hippocampus for the filing system.
Yeah, I like that.
Who's next?
Next up is the hypothalamus.
Okay.
You can think of that as the brain's internal regulator.
Okay.
It's always working to keep your body balanced
Okay.
by managing things like being hungry, thirsty, your sleep patterns, your body temperature.
Okay.
The way it connects to the limbic system
Yeah.
is through its impact on your motivation
Mm-hmm.
and how ready you are to learn.
Okay.
It links your emotional state
Mm-hmm.
to those basic physical needs. So if you're exhausted
Yeah.
or starving, your hypothalamus is going to let you know.
Right.
And it can definitely mess with your focus and your ability to learn.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
trying to focus on something complicated when you're physically uncomfortable is
Yeah.
basically impossible.
It's a recipe for disaster.
What about the thalamus. I feel like I've heard that before
Yeah.
in relation to the brain.
The thalamus works like the brain's central relay station for all the information coming in.
Oh,
So it filters all that sensory input, what you see, what you hear, what you touch.
okay.
And it directs all of that to the right parts of your brain
Okay.
or process it.
So it's like the traffic controller for your brain.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And then finally, we have the cingulate gyrus.
Okay.
And this one acts as a bridge. It connects your emotions to how you think and how you behave.
Okay.
So it's involved in things like noticing when you make a mistake, solving problems,
Okay.
and generally helping you learn better
Mm-hmm.
and make better decisions.
Okay.
What's also really interesting about it
Yeah.
is its role in understanding social cues like empathy
Right.
and in building relationships, which are super important when you're learning with other people.
Okay, so that's a lot of different parts working together.
Yeah.
It really makes it clear that learning isn't just thinking, right? It's super connected to how we feel.
It really is. The limbic system is definitely the emotional heart of your brain,
Okay.
and it completely shapes how you see things,
Yeah.
how you react to things,
Mm-hmm.
and how you deal with your emotions.
Okay.
And the amygdala is super important in all this, you know?
Yeah.
It's constantly deciding how important your different experiences are emotionally.
Okay.
So when something triggers a strong emotion, it could be good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
The amygdala helps mark that memory
Right.
as something important.
Okay.
So you're way more likely to remember it.
So that's why I remember really vivid memories. So
Yeah.
clearly,
Yeah.
whether they're good or bad, thanks, amygdala.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But it also explains why having good emotional experiences while you're learning
Yeah.
can be so effective.
Okay.
These good feelings
Mhm.
actually trigger the release of chemicals in your brain called neurotransmitters,
Okay.
like dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins.
Mm-hmm.
And these chemicals are more than just feel-good chemicals. They actually make the learning process stronger
Okay.
by reinforcing the connections between brain cells.
So if I can
Yeah,
purposely create a stronger connection to what I'm learning,
exactly.
it'll help me remember it better
Yeah,
and stay more into it.
absolutely. Think about it this way.
Yeah.
When learning involves storytelling,
Okay.
hands-on stuff,
Yeah.
or anything that makes you curious or excited,
Mm-hmm.
you're way more likely to remember that info
Okay.
because those things that are emotionally engaging
Mm-hmm.
activate your limbic system in a good way.
Gotcha.
But then think about learning environments that are full of stress and fear.
Yeah.
That kind of negative feeling
Mm-hmm.
can actually make it harder to form memories.
Okay.
And that makes learning less effective.
Right.
Your brain basically goes into like a protective mode,
Mm-hmm.
and learning new stuff just isn't a priority anymore.
Right. Like you're trying to survive.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I always found it way easier to learn when I was comfortable
Yeah.
and actually interested.
It makes a big difference.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about how this emotional center actually helps us make and store memories.
Yeah.
We talked about the amygdala and hippocampus working together.
Exactly. They're really crucial in this.
Okay.
So the hippocampus mainly handles what we call explicit memory
Okay.
or declarative knowledge,
Right.
which is basically the stuff you can actively remember,
Okay.
like facts, figures, events.
Okay.
And you usually learn this through like really focused study,
Yeah.
flashcards, quizzes, that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
But then there's implicit memory,
Okay.
which is your procedural knowledge,
Right.
like skills, habits, things you just know how to do, like riding a bike.
Hmm.
And that gets processed by different parts of the brain,
Okay.
like the basal ganglia and the motor cortex.
Oh, okay.
And you learn those through practice and repetition.
Okay, so the basal ganglia, what does that do?
The basal ganglia coordinate your movements,
Okay.
and the motor cortex controls your voluntary muscles.
Okay.
So basically all the stuff you do without thinking about it too much.
Gotcha. So explicit is like stuff I'm actively trying to learn,
Yeah.
and implicit is like muscle memory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now here's where the amygdala's emotional tagging comes back in.
Okay.
So when something that happens or a bit of info
Yeah.
has a lot of emotional meaning to it,
Yeah.
the amygdala talks to the hippocampus
Okay.
to make that memory stronger.
Okay.
It's like your brain is highlighting the factual information
Right.
with emotion,
Okay.
which makes it more vivid and easier to remember later on.
Gotcha.
And to help the hippocampus really solidify these memories, move them from short-term to long-term,
Yeah.
There's a technique called cyclizide rehearsal, which is basically reviewing the material
Okay.
at longer and longer intervals over time.
So like spaced repetition.
Exactly.
That's a really good way to make information stick.
It really is. It really optimizes how the hippocampus processes and stores everything.
Gotcha.
And it's also worth noting that active learning strategies like self-directed learning,
Okay.
where you take charge of your own learning,
Mm-hmm.
and even peer teaching, where you explain stuff to others,
Okay.
can really help you remember things long term.
So it's not just about taking in info passively,
Right.
but really engaging with it, especially when you have an emotional connection.
Yeah,
That makes a huge difference.
absolutely. When you're actively involved, like explaining it to yourself or to someone else,
Hmm.
you're engaging your brain more deeply,
Okay.
and that makes those memories stronger.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit
Right.
and talk about that drive inside us, motivation. How does the limbic system fuel that desire to learn in the first place?
Motivation is super fundamental to learning.
Okay.
And it really comes down to the limbic system, specifically how the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and those dopamine pathways all work together.
Okay.
So dopamine, is a neurotransmitter in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
and it's often linked to pleasure and feeling rewarded.
Okay.
But it's also super important for motivation, for focus,
Yeah.
and for pushing yourself towards your goals.
So dopamine's like that I want to do that signal.
Yeah, you could say that. So
Yeah.
there are two main types of motivation that the limbic system affects.
Okay, what are they?
The first is intrinsic motivation,
Okay.
and that comes from within. It's your natural curiosity, your interest in something,
Okay.
your desire to grow and learn as a person.
Yeah.
So when your limbic system is engaged in a good way,
Mm-hmm.
it can really boost that intrinsic drive.
Okay.
And that leads to deeper, more meaningful learning.
Okay.
Then there's extrinsic motivation,
Right.
and that's driven by things outside of you, like rewards, grades, or other incentives.
Okay.
And this type of motivation also involves the limbic system
Okay.
because dopamine gets released and reinforces behaviors
Okay.
that lead to those rewards.
So whether I'm learning because I genuinely find something fascinating or because I want to achieve something like passing a test,
Yeah,
my limbic system's involved either way.
exactly. And releasing dopamine is key in both.
Okay.
So when you're actively learning, let's say you're solving a tough problem
Mm-hmm.
or you figure something new out,
Okay.
or even just understand a difficult concept,
Mm-hmm.
your brain often releases dopamine,
Right.
and that reinforces that behavior, improves your focus,
Mm-hmm.
makes you try harder.
Okay.
But if you're super stressed or afraid, it can actually lower your dopamine production,
Okay.
which makes you less motivated and makes it harder to think clearly.
So creating a good and engaging learning environment
Yeah.
isn't just about being nice.
Oh,
It
yeah.
actually affects the brain's chemistry for motivation.
It totally does.
Yeah.
Things like positive feedback,
Okay.
using interactive learning activities that make you curious,
Yeah.
and even this idea of brain page development, which we'll talk about more in a bit,
Yeah.
can help increase dopamine levels
Okay.
and improve intrinsic motivation.
Right.
And obviously reducing stress,
Yeah.
creating a supportive environment where you don't feel afraid,
Mm-hmm.
really lets the limbic system work its best.
Yeah.
And that helps build that natural drive to learn.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So this source material that we've been talking about
Mm-hmm.
mentions this idea of learnography.
Yeah.
What is that?
Learnography is basically combining a few different things.
Yeah.
Limbic science,
Mm.
which is all the stuff we've been talking about,
Mm-hmm.
with emotion, memory, and motivation.
Yeah.
And then there's cognitive science,
Mm-hmm.
which focuses on mental processes like paying attention and problem solving.
Okay.
And then there's motor science,
Right.
which is about movement and action.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole goal of learnography
Yeah.
is to develop better ways to transfer knowledge
Okay.
and improve the learning experience overall. And it does that by understanding how all these different parts of your brain
Mm-hmm.
work together.
So it's a brain-based approach to learning.
Exactly.
What are some specific learning strategies
Yeah.
driven by this idea?
So the source highlights a few key ones.
Okay.
One is brain page making,
Okay.
which means you're actively building knowledge in your own mind
Yeah.
through things like reading and writing.
Okay.
You're basically creating your own mental framework for the information.
Okay.
Then there's thalamic cyclizide rehearsal,
Okay.
which is that spaced repetition we were talking about,
Yeah.
to really get information into your long-term memory.
Okay, so brain page making sounds kind of like a more hands-on way of taking notes and organizing information, almost
Yeah.
like making your own study guide as you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it encourages you to process the material more deeply.
Okay.
Another strategy that focuses on the limbic system is the happiness classroom model, which is about creating a learning environment that minimizes stress and really pumps up that dopamine-driven motivation.
Right, because emotions have such a big impact on learning.
Totally. And then there's motor science in learning,
Okay.
which emphasizes using the basal ganglia, that part of your brain involved in movement, for action-based memory.
Okay.
So this could involve physical activities,
Okay.
hands-on projects, or even just adding movement into your study routine.
So it's about getting the whole brain involved?
Exactly.
The emotional centers, the thinking parts, and even the movement system.
Yeah, to create a more impactful learning experience.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
By using the power of the limbic system, learners can build stronger emotional connections
Exactly.
to what they're learning, which helps them remember it better and makes them more motivated to succeed.
That's the idea.
So this has been a super interesting
Yeah, it really has.
deep dive into the limbic system.
It's a fascinating part of the brain.
To sum up, what are the most important things for someone listening to remember?
Well, the biggest takeaway is how crucial a well-supported limbic system is for learning and memory.
Okay.
When you feel emotionally connected to the material, you're way more likely to remember it.
Right.
And when you're curious and driven, learning is just more effective and enjoyable.
Yeah.
Managing stress is also super important
Okay.
because it lets your limbic system work at its best
Right.
for focus and processing information.
Okay.
And using active learning techniques like brainpage development can help you build strong, independent learning habits.
So basically, it's about actively engaging with learning on an emotional level instead of just passively absorbing info.
Exactly, the principles of learnography that we talked about, which prioritize the limbic system, offer a path to more effective and fulfilling learning.
Okay.
It's all about recognizing that your emotions, motivation, and memories are all connected.
Okay.
Understanding this connection is the key to reaching your full learning potential.
Absolutely. It's clear that the limbic system is way more than just a primitive part of the brain.
Yeah.
It's really the key to unlocking deeper learning, emotional engagement, and that intrinsic motivation.
Exactly.
So as you're thinking about everything we've talked about, how all our emotions, memories, and motivations are tied together in this system, what's one small change you could make in how you approach learning?
Yeah.
What could help you unlock a deeper, more enjoyable experience?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Maybe you could look into brain page development or thalamic cyclicide rehearsal. Those could be good starting points for taking control of your own learning journey.
Yeah, I think so.
Understanding our brain seems like it gives us the power to completely change how we learn.
It really does.
That wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks for exploring this with us.
Thanks for having me.